If you have been on the internet in the last week, there is no way you have missed this clip. Brandi Kruse, ex-TV reporter in Seattle. She worked at the competitor station back when I was a Seattle TV reporter. Feels like a lifetime ago. And she was recently invited to speak on this panel about violence on the West Coast. And it included President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi. And this particular clip has made its way around the globe. So I want to show this clip, and Brandi is backstage. She's going to come in and talk all about it. Here we go.
And I was told by probably a dozen people not to tell you this. I'm going to tell it to you anyway, because it's relevant to what we're talking about. I'm living proof that you can recover from TDS. I had strong Trump Derangement Syndrome for probably 8 years. This is one of the reasons I recovered from it. And by the way, it's much better to not have TDS. I'm happier, I'm healthier, more successful. I even think I got a little more attractive after I got rid of my Trump Derangement Syndrome. Yes. You know, I'm a reporter in Seattle, and frankly, I could not care any less what any of you have to say.
Okay, hang on. I want to show that in a little bit. All right, so she says she got more attractive. You're going to have to be the judge in a second, everybody. Like I said, I'm going to bring her in 1 second. But before we do that, don't forget, one of the best ways to make sure that you are actually more attractive is to keep your teeth. All right. Especially if you're going to be talking smack, you've got TDS. He never does anything right. Or you love Trump and you've got TDS the opposite direction. He never does anything wrong. If you're going to be talking smack with your friends, you got to have your teeth. Okay. There's nothing that makes somebody more attractive than a full set of choppers. So go to greenpasture.org, and get the cod liver butter oil that I credit for helping me with my dental health. I used to get cavities all the time. What has significantly helped it? Vitamins A, D, and K, specifically D and K, which you need both of which you need both if you're going to speak proper English, in order to make sure you're absorbing them. And this was put together in the way that Dr. Weston Price said he should formulate it so that you get the most out of both products. Okay, you just take a fish oil, not as good as also taking a high vitamin D butter oil with it. Like I said, because the vitamins all help with the absorption. Okay, this is what I take: fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil blend. They make capsules if you don't like the taste of the gel. I prefer the gel. I take the cinnamon tingle flavor. We take it every day. And like I said, I used to get cavities all the time. One time I went 3 years in Seattle without going to the dentist because I just forgot about it, because they're so crazy in Seattle. The news kept me so busy. I didn't have time to go to the dentist. And I still didn't have any cavities. It was amazing. So go shop greenpasture.org. Use promo code Allison for 10% off. I promise you will not be disappointed. They got plenty of other products over there. They've got natural muscle rubs, which I really like, especially like during cold season. Put a little bit on your chest. It's got eucalyptus and some other stuff in it. Breathe easier. But this is stuff I take every day. The fermented cod liver oil, concentrated butter oil, greenpasture.org, promo code Allison, and let me know what you think. Okay, so the moment you've all been waiting for, I'm going to bring Brandi in here, and we're going to hear all about that clip. Welcome back.
I feel a lot of pressure because it's 8:30 in the morning here, and you're having people gauge my attractiveness, and I just woke up, man. I just woke up.
I think you even look prettier than you did here. So I think you just keep getting prettier every day, Brandi. I don't know what we attribute. I would like to attribute this to the fact that you're out of corporate news. You're running your own show now. You get to say what you want. Look at this picture of her right now. She's about to tell the media what she really thinks. And that's the next clip I'm going to play. But the first thing I want to talk about is, forget about all the stuff you were there to actually talk to him about, because this clip was the one that really went around the world. Everybody posting that this is either the most hilarious thing they've ever seen, or, you know, the media taking it very seriously and calling you a Trump fangirl, and, you know, what happened to Brandi, you know. So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the reaction to it. Were you surprised, or no? Did you know that when you said that it was going to set off a lightning storm?
Well, I hadn't planned really to say it. It's funny because I've said no to a bunch of interviews and stuff where they said after the White House they want to talk about my TDS comment. And I'm like, okay, it was like a joke within a larger context of why we're there, and I don't want to dwell on it. And I said yes to you because I'll always say yes to you, but I also know that we can have a fun conversation about it. I think, one, you have to know my personality. I like to keep things light. I like to gauge the mood of a room. I think it's part of public speaking. And Trump was in rare form that day. And I thought, I should tell the president I had TDS for 8 years. And also, when I said more attractive, I don't physically literally mean I got more attractive because I voted for Donald Trump finally. I mean that, if you've ever been in that space, and I really did despise the president for 8 years. I was a never Trumper. A lot of that, I think, was the result of groupthink in a newsroom setting. And I have my issues with him, and we could talk about that now. But I think I see people who feel that way about the president currently, and I see it really eat away at them. And they obsess over it almost every single day. And they believe he's literally ruining their life and the country. And anytime you harbor that kind of ill will and constant hatred, I think it is going to make you a less attractive person.
Because you're just grumpy.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. If you're stewing on something every day, I think that you're just going to be less happy. And people who are less happy are less attractive, frankly. So I don't care what it is. If it's TDS, if it's, you hate your husband, if it's you're miserable in your life, you hate your job, I think that you're just going to be a less attractive, more unappealing person to be around.
Okay. On that note, I would like to play this next clip where you talked directly to the media. And I thought this was also very interesting because just watching you speak directly to them, just looking at your body language, I mean, you were definitely meaning business here.
And I'll say really quick, they're about 3 feet away from me. So the room looks larger than it is. I'm on the edge of this table. So they are an arm's distance away from me.
And are you seeing people that you know personally, or you're just seeing cameras and folks that are there covering it?
I mean, no, personally, I'm seeing people who I know from television, but
okay, but nobody specifically in Seattle. Like these are national types.
Correct.
Okay. All right, here we go. Let's play this. And we'll discuss.
From it. And by the way, it's much better to not have TDS.
It's right after
I'm
this.
Happier. I'm
we'll just go over the attractive part again.
Successful. I even think I got a little more attractive after I got rid of my Trump Derangement Syndrome. Yes. I'm a reporter in Seattle, and frankly, I could not care any less what any of you have to say about this meeting. Could not care any less. We're not here for you. I'm not here to convince any of you that Antifa is a real thing. Because if you have not come to that conclusion by now, you are never going to come to that conclusion because you don't want to see it. And you're going to go and you're going to say it's a bunch of right-wing conservative influencers who are here spinning a tale. I was one of you. I was a mainstream reporter in Seattle for 10 years. I was a TV reporter on the streets doing my job, and I was still assaulted by Antifa. So it's not about being conservative. It's about people who go there and show what they're doing. And when I saw, after all those years, that the media wouldn't be honest about what was happening, that Democratic politicians wouldn't be honest about what was happening, I thought, well, gosh, if they're not being honest about that, maybe they're not being honest about President Trump either. And it opened my mind to just looking at things for what they were.
I think that's a very interesting point you make at the end. So let's break this down for a second. So first, you're saying, look, if you haven't come to the conclusion that there's a problem here, then you're never going to. And you write it off as like, look, she thinks this way because she's a right-wing influencer, or Katie or Andy, they work for the post-millennial. So that's not even real journalism. Like I saw that response about your video. What's that guy's name? I can't remember. One of the famous Mehdi Hassan, yeah. And yeah, it's like, LOL, none of these people are real journalists. And that's how they write it off, I think, so that they don't have to come to terms with the fact that there are detractors now from their own ranks that are criticizing them. And that's much harder to deal with than just saying, like, the general public is stupid and they don't really know how it works in the media. They don't know how hard we're trying. They don't know how good we are at our jobs. Like, you know everything about it. You know the inside drills. So they can't write it off in that way. And I think that's what's nerve-wracking for them, because then they have to actually come to terms with what the ideas are that you're sharing. What do you think about the reaction you got to that statement?
Yeah, and I think that's what I care about far more. And it shows in what I said to the president after that is, let's not focus on what they call it and not what they report on it. Let's focus on the next 3.5 years. We finally have a president who acknowledges the existence of this far left faction and is willing to do something about it. So let's pretend like we only have 3.5 years to do something about it, and let's make a dent. But it is, and look, I mean, you knew me when I was in Seattle. I feel like I was a pretty good journalist. And what are all the ways that journalists gauge their own worthiness? Emmys, Edward R. Murrow Awards. What is it? Because I have them all, and I don't mean to sound big-headed, but I feel like I was very good at my job, and I was very straightforward, down the middle. And again, even at that time, privately, of course, I did not like President Donald Trump. So I was still attacked by Antifa then. And so to me, if they want to say I'm like, as a conservative right-wing influencer, making up this threat, you could go back 10 years and you could find me talking about Antifa and the danger of Antifa and what was happening around the Occupy movement, and then the May Day riots in Seattle, and then BLM in the summer of 2020, and my real frustration with elected leaders for kind of ignoring this left-wing rampant extremism that was popping up on a regular basis. And so it's disappointing to me that in the reaction to that, and that was, by the way, one of the reasons I was included on the panel. So Andy No, who's sort of the godfather of covering Antifa, he wanted to make sure I was there because of my background as a journalist.
Mm-hmm.
And, there
as
are
a corporate journalist.
As a corporate journalist. Yeah. And I don't consider, and look, people, the label thing. I'm okay if people don't want to call me a journalist now. I'm a political commentator, and that's what I call myself. But we do journalism, we do special reports, we do interviews, we news gather, we fact check. We do probably more journalism than corporate journalists do, because I want to make sure my opinions are grounded in fact.
Well, and you're more honest, I think, by saying this is what I think, and you go on to say it, versus the corporate press is like, this is our objective, reporting. We don't share any opinion. They're like, no, it's just cloaked in this illusion that you are objective and that you really even know what you're talking about. Yeah. You said that you woke up with the fact that the corporate press didn't cover this factually. That was one of the things, but I was as an environmental reporter towards the end of my career, last 5-6 years. And I would start to see that climate change was politicized, that the Clean Water Act was politicized. And then I would say, well, okay, how do I get to the bottom of this? I need more time. My bosses wouldn't give it to me. So then I had to start going on television, recognizing that I really didn't know what I was talking about when it came to these complex topics. And then that turned me into a liar, at which point I had to leave. I mean, I just couldn't stay anymore. I had to either reformat my position in order to, believe what I was saying, like to come on the air and say, okay, I know what I'm saying. At least I've investigated it to my comfort level, but I was just never going to have the chance to do that. And I think that a lot of the journalists working at, I don't know, they haven't woken up to how little they know. I think that's one of the biggest problems. They walk around with a significant amount of pride about what they know and very little humility about their capacity to actually know that, like to really sit down and say, how much time did I spend on understanding this particular issue? Do I really know that what I'm talking about is true? Or have I just taken NBC's talking points? Everybody else is saying it. I mean, just so many topics. And so especially I was already out when COVID hit. But then I really got down the rabbit hole, because that was just like, okay, I mean, security state stuff, how all of this stuff is narrated, the suppression of speech online, how long has this been happening? The heretics, the heterodox thinkers, how often have we called them crazy? How long have we said, quote, experts say? I mean, that phrase just like nails on a chalkboard now. I can't even handle hearing it.
100%.
So yeah, I had that same wake up that you did about all of that. And so, yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting to see how they still continue to write people off like us, when it's like, no, look, I'm admitting that, even I made those mistakes that I'm pointing out. I'm not saying that I was perfect. You were a good reporter in Seattle, because you at least, Brandi, I think, and that's part of the reason why you're successful now independently, being able to just cover Washington State. A lot of independent news types on the internet can't just focus on like one state and be successful. They're doing all kinds of national or international stories in order to have a bigger audience to support themselves financially. The reason I think in part that you've been so successful is you're able to give voice to the perspectives on these issues that very few people see in mainstream media there. And so like, wow, there's one person, or maybe a couple, Jason Rants, that's willing to like at least give voice to my perspective. And I think that's why people flock to you, because you do look at the issues that way.
Yeah, and to your point on environmental reporting, I mean, to me, that's sort of the epitome of the issue that we're talking about here. And I was interviewing, gosh, I can't remember his name now. He wrote a book on this about how COVID was the dress rehearsal and climate is the main show. And they were sort of seeing how much they could control the populace over fear, right, during COVID and climate. You know, this existential threat to the world is sort of really going to test how much a population's willing to comply. And you look at that with our current environmental policies, which have arguably gotten far worse since you left. You know, we had a climate governor who actually didn't do anything good for the climate, didn't meet any of his climate goals. You know, things like the plastic bag ban just came out. It was actually bad for the environment, yet they still won't walk away from it. But imagine saying any of those things at King 5 News, which was the furthest left TV station in town that you worked for.
And is it still? I think it's worse than when I was there.
Oh, it is absolutely the leftist TV station in town. And they would never allow a reporter to go on and question whether a climate policy is working.
Well,
under no circumstance.
Yeah. I mean, I was told overtly, this is very, very close to the end before I resigned, but I was told overtly that they would never let anybody question climate change on their air. Now, when they said that, when my manager said that to me, it's because he believed this whole idea of no questioning is doing the public a service. You know, you can't question it, or else you're allowing people to think nasty thoughts that aren't true and go down this illusion that everything is fine, and really that you're kind of questioning like modernity at large. You know, it was both the vaccines, like you weren't allowed to ask any questions about vaccines. That's what brought up the climate change conversation. And when it's funny because when this particular manager said it to me, he was, I think, thinking that I would go, oh, okay, I get it. When he was like, look, I'm not going to, you know, because I was told I could not discuss vaccines in the newsroom anymore. And that was, I think, did I tell you this story? It was so crazy because we were covering the legislature's discussions over whether the philosophical and religious exemption should be removed from the school choice options for parents. And so there was this active debate in the public at the time. Like everybody's like, should you be able to have these philosophical and religious exemptions? And the only thing we ever did to cover the topic is we'd have the Department of Health spokesperson on, basically, you know, dunking on a mom at a protest. And that's how we covered the issue. And I just didn't find that to be interesting at the time. I never questioned vaccines back then, but I questioned our coverage because I was curious what these moms are talking about. And I wanted to hear another doctor. I wanted to hear a doctor talk to the Department of Health doctor. I didn't get anything out of the doctor at the Department of Health dunking on the mom at the protest. And so when I brought up that there was a conference coming to town for Informed Choice Washington with a bunch of, you know, triple board certified physicians, I was like, we should go. Let's hear what these doctors have to say. And I was an environmental reporter, so I wasn't going to be the one covering it anyway. I just forwarded the email to our health reporter and to the assignment desk. And my manager told me that the fact that I would even do that I would think that that would be something worthy to consider, shows that I should not be trusted on this topic. I'm not even allowed to discuss it in the cafeteria. And so when I said, that's absolutely crazy. And so that made me revolt. You know, at that point I was and you know, I'm Irish, so you have to be really careful when you trigger that part of me. But anyway, so he said, try to calm me down. He said, look, I wouldn't let anybody question climate change either. And I'm thinking, why? You know, so because he was trying to make me feel better about it. And that just made me feel even worse. It was funny because at the time we were running this Stand for Truth campaign. You know, it was like everybody was talking to the truth, and it's Stand for Truth. We stand for truth. And I remember telling people, I'm going to get the shirt that says Stand for Truth, but on the back, it's going to say, accept vaccines and climate change. You know? Like, have it added.
I would have bought that. I would have bought that shirt for
maybe
sure.
I should still make it. So, okay, continue. So, yes, so the King is still way left. Okay. That's
I mean, there's a real lack of critical thought. And I think that's the fundamental issue. And that's why, you know, I just have to not care about the reactions to what I said at the White House and to Antifa and all of that, because I think it's just beneath the dignity of people who can think for themselves to really expect that the media can come back from the place that it's in. Because as I pointed out, you know, even in Seattle, my reputation still was, you know, as being like problematic conservative, even when I was like anti-Trump, and that's what, the leftists would paint me as. And maybe it was because I was blonde and worked for the Fox affiliate. I don't know. So they'll paint anyone who questions the left's narrative as right wing. I mean, they really will. And for example, with Donald Trump, they call him a fascist and a Nazi and that he's threatening our country. I guarantee you, whoever the next Republican is who takes over once Trump leaves, I don't care if it's Liz freaking Cheney, they will call her Trump 2.0, because now this is their shtick, right? And every Republican is going to be an existential threat to our nation. And by the way, I'm not even a Republican. I talk on my show all the time about how I vehemently oppose the two-party system. Now, I definitely align more with today's Republican Party than today's unhinged Democratic Party, but that doesn't mean that I love everything they do. One of the funny things I actually had, and this is going to just raise a bunch of emotions within me, so I'm going to try not to be upset by it. After my visit to the White House, I had two very close family members who said some incredibly hurtful things to me and about me. And these are family members who are like very close family members. And I just couldn't believe it, because to me, the only sane response to a loved one going, and doing something that's cool for her career is to say, hey, great job. That's awesome. Even if you don't like the president. This was really horrific stuff. And I'll just say, I had an uncle who was like a dad to me. I mean, my dad was very absent growing up, basically publicly stating that I was doing it for the money, that I have no ethics and morals anymore, that I've cozied up to the president and I'm going to pay the price for it. It was just insane. I mean, I was in tears, I'm just going to say to your audience, I don't care. I mean, I'm still just a girl, I'm a 36-year-old girl trying to find her place in the world. And when my uncle said something so hurtful about me and my character and questioned my motives, I mean, I was in tears when I should have been on this high after the White House. And it just is, I think it is this weird place that we're in as a nation where I don't know how productive we can be by even being out there and trying to sort of tell the truth of what's going on, because there really is half the populace that is just not going to listen to it if they don't like the messenger, if the messenger dissents at all from their worldview. So that's why I'm just focused now on the Antifa thing, on trying to do everything I can to help the FBI and the DOJ through my reporting take down Antifa from within. Don't even care how it's characterized anymore.
I think every single one of us who has been on the questioning side of the last 5 to 6 years has had a story, at least one story like that. So you are definitely not alone, Brandi. I'm sorry that happened. I was told a long time ago, my parents told me that when people say something about you, it is a projection and reflective of them. Is not reflective of you. And let's, talk about this for a second, since you brought it up, because there were people like this. Okay. You're saying TDS makes you sad, miserable, and less attractive. It's science. President Trump understands. And that was in response to this headline. Yeah. Trump 79 makes creepy remark to fangirl reporter. Yeah. Fangirl reporter. And that's how a lot of people who don't, want to listen to any of this have described you. Yeah. But you're not really a fangirl reporter. You have been critical of President Trump. And I do have some audience questions that I was going to throw your way too, related to this. Where do you think Trump has crossed the line on the Constitution with any of the stuff you've discussed? Has he free speech? That kind of thing. Yeah. But could you just respond to that? I mean, sure. Do you consider yourself a fangirl?
It's so funny how I can be a never Trumper for 8 years, vote for him for the very first time last summer. I came around to Trump and finally decided, okay, I'm going to vote for him like a year and a half ago and be a fangirl. What's interesting, first of all, you're not allowed to be offended for me if I'm not offended. And I'm not offended by the president saying very attractive. It didn't bother me. I didn't find it creepy. He was looking at me like a dad as far as I'm concerned. So I'd like to make compliments great again. We've scared men away from complimenting women, and now they're just scared little sissies. And I think we should allow men to give pleasant compliments to women. So I'm not offended by it. But what was really funny is before that panel, I was actually worried that they were going to revoke my invite maybe, or somebody was going to say something, because I had just called for Pam Bondi's resignation. I had just called repeatedly for Pam Bondi's resignation over her comments about free speech. And I felt like she didn't fundamentally understand the protections of the First Amendment, and free speech is a non-starter for me for anyone who wants to erode it or attack it. So here I'm at this panel and Pam Bondi's sitting there. I'm like, I just called for her resignation. And the other thing, to Trump and whether I'm a fangirl, I'm critical of Trump on my show all the time. I said, there was a Seattle Times article about my White House appearance where it suggested that I was cheering on President Trump's threat to send National Guard or troops into cities like Portland and Seattle. And I responded to the Times with a clip of my show from the day before. I said, I have said no less than 6 times that I am very opposed to the idea of a president sending American military or the National Guard into American cities in a broader law enforcement capacity. DC is an exception because there's some different rules that govern that area. But as bad as Seattle and Portland are, and as much as I think they could probably benefit from an increased law enforcement presence, I am very opposed to it. And so, I say all these things that are critical of the president, and I make one joke about him, and all of a sudden I'm a fangirl, and I have the other type of Trump derangement syndrome that he can do no wrong. No, I think the president can do wrong. I think he does, especially when he verbally, I think he says a lot of things he shouldn't say. But on the whole, I think he's doing a good job as the president. But if I lost my ability to criticize him, then I would be no better than the mainstream media that I'm criticizing for their one-sided coverage.
Okay. I'm going to ask you some questions related to that. But first, we had a couple audience questions. I have a wine club. Go join it if you're interested in wines that do not have a bunch of the gross stuff that's in a lot of stuff you would get at the grocery store, the fillers, the dyes, preservatives. A lot of my wines in the club, which you will sign up for and get 6 bottles every 3 months. Okay, so 6 bottles every 3 months. And you don't have to worry about buying any more for whatever awkward holiday parties coming up in the next couple of months. Somebody said something mean to you over what you heard today. You're listening to this show. They found out you listen to my join the wine club. Have a glass of wine. Forget about it. All right. ALISONWinePromo.com. These were hand selected for the kind of stuff I like. I drink raw milk. I clean my house with vinegar. I hide my husband's McDonald's if I find that he got it somewhere. So I'm definitely that person. I'm not going to drink wine that's really disgusting. So go join the wine club, ALISONWinePromo.com. If you are not over there, consider it. If you have been over there for a while, thank you so much. Love Bonner Wine. They've been with me since the beginning. And they're great bottles of wine, but they're also very clean. So that's what I like about them. And they taste great. And they're also great gifts if you're not a wine drinker. ALISONWinePromo.com. Okay, let's take us back. It's kind of on the same vein. But
Sure.
yeah. Okay. So on locals, alisonmar.locals.com. And by the way, let's give Brandi a shout out real fast. Brandi, where's the best place to follow you?
I would say, if you want to subscribe and support our show, you can go to patreon.com/undivided. But my YouTube channel is great. So I think it's just at Brandi Kruse on YouTube.
Okay. Okay. So the questions that came in, kind of like what you were saying. Okay. Critical thought. This scares me to death. Quote, there are many others we are looking at. Most have been named terrorist organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this was something that people were concerned about, like after January 6th. That speech online during COVID, for instance, was following that route, basically, that you were going to be named, something besides just having, a dissenting opinion. You were going to somehow be escalated to a position of thought criminal. And yeah, the question basically, like, are you at all concerned about government overreach and the integrity of the U.S. Constitution under this administration?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And actually, if you go further into the panel, I had a follow-up remark to the president, and I said very clearly, we cannot prosecute ideas and ideology. We have to prosecute behavior. And so that is the point I was making to the Attorney General, is you can't get to a point where we're going after people for their ideology. It has to be illegal behavior. So whether you want to call it Antifa or something else, it matters less to me than recognizing that there is an organized, especially on the West Coast, left-wing violent political faction that often works together and coordinates behind the scenes and is getting money from various entities. And we need to go after them for their criminal conduct, not their ideas. So I 100% agree. And, it's something I'll watch closely. And if they take things too far, it's important that me and others are the ones who step in and say, okay, that's not what we talked about. That's not what we stand for. So yeah, I'm always concerned about that. You always have to think about this power used in the hands of your worst enemy. How is it going to be used? So are they going to go after Moms for Liberty as a terror organization? You have to think about all that for sure.
Right.
So that's a great question.
Right. Yeah. Like Critical Thought here says
Mhm.
declaring Antifa a domestic terrorist organization is the top of a slippery slope of dystopian governmental social control and loss of civil rights. Please be careful what you wish for, people. What do you think about that?
Let me read it again. Declaring Antifa as a domestic terror organization. I don't have an issue per se with Antifa being labeled a domestic terror organization. Again, as long as you're prosecuting actions, not ideas. Like I don't think the government should go out there and round up anyone who wears a patch that says Antifa and say you're a terrorist, you're going to federal prison. So it comes into how are they going to carry this out? And right now I'm okay with the use of it. I mean, they just built a federal domestic terror case around what happened in Texas with the shooting of the is it a border patrol or ICE agent? I can't remember which, but when he was shot, and it was, a group that was very coordinated. They planned it out. They had a chat about what weapons they were bringing, funding, and all of those things. So I think the proof is in the pudding, but I do not have, they are a terror organization. As far as I'm concerned, what they're engaged in is domestic terrorism. And so I don't have an issue with the label, but I don't think you should be prosecuted for a label. I think you should be prosecuted for actions.
Okay. And thank you, Don's wife. Thanks to both of you, lovely ladies. We need more truth tellers like you. Last question about what's happening out there. It's not your market, it's Portland, but people are protesting naked. What do you think about these nude ins? Have you seen the videos of these nude ins?
Oh, yeah, unfortunately, yes. I mean, I
Yes.
was down in Portland. I spent 48
No.
hours down there for a special we did called 48 Hours in Portland, where, by the way, if you watch it, you can see that I'm critical of the president in the 48 Hours in Portland special I put out a week and a half before I went to the White House, because it's not a war zone. I mean, that's total hyperbole. The biggest war zone in Portland is the people dying downtown in filth and squalor with needles in their arms. That's the biggest war zone in Portland. But it still is a very problematic situation outside the ICE facility. And I saw nudity firsthand while I was there. There was a chick who was very well endowed, who was scooting around on a wheelchair with her tatas out. So couldn't
Man.
avoid that one.
Why are they saying this is helpful? It's just to draw attention to the issue, or
I actually think it's more strategic than that, because now they're dressing up in these inflatable costumes. I think they're trying for the visual effect to make themselves look silly and harmless when they're
yeah.
not silly and harmless. I think that's
Oh,
what
okay. Right. So sway public opinion against that there's any
Mhm.
danger to this particular issue and make the
Yeah.
government look crazy.
Yeah, 100%. And I said when I left and went down to Portland, and I went to Portland because frankly, there are a lot of conservative influencers who aren't doing anything even resembling journalism, and I think are there to stir the pot on the ground. And I saw that and I thought, okay, I've been covering these people for a long time. Let me go down there and give it my, assessment. And so it was not only because the media was lying about Portland and the president was calling it a war zone and the governor was saying nothing was wrong, but also conservatives were, creating, I think, some problems on the ground. Not all of them. There's some good conservative journalists who are doing great work down there. But yeah, I mean, I even said in my special that the vast majority of people down there are peacefully protesting and absolutely should not be subjected to any sort of, government suppression of that speech. A lot of them are geriatrics, which, by the way, we need to study what's happening with 70 to 85-year-old white Americans. There's something that we need to study in a lab about that. I don't know how to explain it.
Physically or mentally?
Mentally. They're mentally. I mean, I had my mom's ex-boyfriend on his Facebook page was saying, my grandfather fought fascism, on the beaches of Normandy, and we're going to fight fascism now. I'm like, are you really comparing yourself to soldiers who fought and died against, Hitler and Nazi Germany, and you're just shitposting, watching MSNBC on your couch in Fargo, North Dakota? Like, it's not the same thing, bro.
Okay, I have to ask you this too, since it just came up. What do you think about the freaking out over Jimmy Kimmel and the First Amendment? And this is the worst time for the First Amendment, in 40 or 50 years. I know I have that reaction too.
Yeah,
What do you
it's
think?
ridiculous. I mean, I did a debate about this. It's shocking to me that anyone thinks free speech is worse now than in the Biden era. We had never seen anything like we saw in the Biden era, and literal government cooperation with private entities to suppress wrongthink, to the point where, in the best example is the Hunter Biden laptop story, not only being suppressed, but you couldn't even privately send it to people on social media. So they were removing links in private messages to a story that was ultimately true. And so we've never seen anything like we saw in the Biden era. And so any sort of assertion that it's worse under Trump is crazy to me. And the Jimmy Kimmel thing, like, I don't know the extent to which the FCC conversations really happened, right? I don't believe that that Jimmy Kimmel and ABC and Disney should have lost an FCC license over what Jimmy Kimmel said. I don't believe that. So any threat of that, I think, would have been inappropriate. But it was clear, and you and I know how TV works, and I tried to explain this to my viewers. When the affiliates won't air your show, you don't have a show. And the two largest owners of ABC affiliates in the country said they were upset by the comment and weren't going to air his show. So that would have been the end of the Jimmy Kimmel show. So I think that had more to do with the decision of the affiliates, Sinclair and Nexstar, than it did with the president or any sort of anger they had over what Jimmy Kimmel said. And that's a business decision. So yeah, I mean, that's just a ridiculous statement.
Did you, because it took me a second to remember this, but did you see the comments about it perhaps being related to how Nexstar is buying Tegna, my old company, and they need the FCC's okay for that, approval for that, basically. And so they're like playing nice with the FCC. So they were doing it so that they didn't have a target on their back, so the deal would go through.
Yeah, and look, is that possible? Sure. I don't know, but you have to remember these are also conservative ownership stations. They are. I mean, they are conservative. And so it doesn't surprise me that they would be offended to a certain extent by what Jimmy Kimmel said. But look, if there was something that happened behind the scenes where they said, we cannot anger the FCC, we have to take a strong stance on what he said about Charlie Kirk, totally plausible, but it's just a guess and there's no evidence of it. So I'm just basing my opinion off of what I actually know to be true. And there's more evidence that it was a business decision than it was the FCC trying to control speech. But I think the one comment from Brendan Carr about, God, what did he say? He had one sentence he said publicly
It was
that
like,
did go too far.
Yeah, we might have to take action if they don't, or it was something like that.
Yeah, and you know, and there's also, you know, I can't remember the name of the doctrine. It's escaping me this early in the morning, but there is some thought that we need to reevaluate some of the rules that govern the FCC, because there is this oversight capability for the FCC to be able to pull someone's license if they're not basically acting in the interest of the American people, but it's never used. So if it's never used, should it even be there? Is it outdated?
Right.
Should we do away with it and have the FCC take on a different role?
Yeah. You don't want something on the books that can be used in a nefarious way. That a lot of people, I saw as a local TV reporter, like with the environment, that was always problematic. They would say like, oh, we don't have to do anything about it because it's kind of like a moot point. We don't use it. And I was always like, well, then why don't you just take it out? Like, it sounds like you guys just want to keep it around for a rainy day, just in case you ever want it. And I was always uncomfortable with that. Okay. Critical thought: the goon squads are currently snatching U.S. citizens from our streets due to profiling and incompetence. Not all, but some. Unfettered law enforcement must be checked. Have you seen anything like that? I think he's in California.
Yeah, I saw an article out today from ProPublica that said under the Trump administration, 100, I'm going to get it wrong, some from memory, like 127 people have been wrongly snatched up by ICE and later released. Obviously, we don't want any instances of American citizens being detained by ICE because for whatever. But the question I asked ProPublica under that post that I'd be curious to know is how often did that happen during the Biden administration and during the Obama administration, because they only looked at it in the last year, I believe, under Trump. So I'd like to see the numbers to see if, we should be mad at Trump or we should be mad at a greater, overall system. And because the same is true, speaking of, if you don't want to enforce that law, take it off the books. There are some people genuinely just mad that Trump is enforcing federal laws on immigration. Okay, so do you want to get rid of that law? Because that's a law. So if you have a problem with it, you should be talking to Congress about saying we should just allow anyone in the country and not be mad at Trump, because Trump still has not surpassed the number of people deported by Obama or Biden. And so, and that includes, his first term and the term that he's in right now. And Biden had this massive stretch where he was deporting more people monthly than President Biden or that President Trump has in any single month since he came back into the White House. So, if their issue is just how openly it's happening and all of that, I don't know. But yeah, I don't want any American citizen arrested by ICE, but I'd have to look at individual instances. Was it a case of mistaken identity and the person refused to provide, their ID, refused to say who they are? I don't know. So to just broad brush it and say this is just them saying there's a brown person, go get them, I don't think is fair. I think you have to have some nuance and look at the individual instances and why they were arrested in the first place.
Yeah. I don't know. It's at a point where you really, I don't trust anything unless I saw it for myself. I don't
100%.
really trust. I have to
Yeah,
see
and
it
can I
for
just say
myself.
to that point, all of these, every sob story I've seen about someone picked up by ICE has turned out not to be true. Every single one. We did this story on our show. It was a story in the Olympian, which is the newspaper for the capital city in Washington state. And it was about this guy named Paco and how his neighbor started a GoFundMe for him because he was just ripped off his farm by ICE. He was a law-abiding business owner, and nothing untoward happened. And immediately when I saw this story, I'm like, something is not ringing true here, because it was like a sketch of this guy named Paco. They didn't use a last name for him, and the whole story sounded bogus. But the Olympian printed it just on the say-so of this woman, just on her say-so, no information from ICE, no corroboration, nothing. So we start digging into it. And we find out that this guy's name is not Paco. His name is Yusef Barate Bourbon, and he is a Mexican national wanted for murder who fled Mexico to the U.S. and was not picked up by ICE. He was picked up by the U.S. Marshals on an extradition for his homicide charge. And so it just shows you, like, they are willing to believe anything that makes Trump look bad without actually doing an iota of due diligence to get to the bottom of a story.
Yes, it brings me back to so many memories I have when I was in the business, where it was like if you had the cover of groupthink, you ran with it. And I did it. I did it before I woke up. I've told stories about, like, the experts at the Department of Health saying blah, blah, blah. And we're like outside a doctor's office at 10 o'clock with no statement from him because it's 10. He's not in the office right now, but we didn't care about ruining the person's career based on the Department of Health, because we just trusted the Department of Health had our best interests. They were telling us the truth, and that anybody outside the government, we had to fact check. Did you notice that? Like, it's like, if it was in one of these trusted agencies, we would just spout out the press release. But if I came to your station and I said, look, I know this is going on, I'd be like, okay, we got to get at least 3 other sources that confirm this. We have to make sure this is really true. But with the government, the media just kind of, unless it's Trump, which is very weird. So they do have the capacity to switch, and be skeptical of the government if it's not their person in charge. It's very weird. It's very, very weird.
I would rather, by the way, the media treat every politician like they treat Trump.
Right,
I would rather go in the
sure.
opposite direction, more critical than less critical, overly critical, even if you will. That's the role of the media. So my issue is not so much that they're hard on Trump. It's that they're hard on Trump and they give virtually every Democrat a free pass. And I live in a state where Democrats are in control of everything, yet the media is still harder on Republicans who have no power or influence here whatsoever. And it's just absolutely infuriating. But you're right on the, and I've fallen into this trap before too. I remember a specific incident where I got something wrong, and it's very, very much what I'm criticizing for people now. I was in mainstream news, and it was during 2020 in Seattle, during the occupied protest zone. And it was a couple days after the CHOP, as it was called, was formed, and the police abandoned the East Precinct. And they had a press conference down at police headquarters where they said that business owners were being extorted by protesters of money up in the CHOP zone. And I just reported it very uncritically that it was happening. It turned out it wasn't happening at all. And so I think that was me wanting to believe and believing, that probably is happening, and not trying to, like, what are the names of the business owners? Can we go independently verify that this is happening? So I got burned on something like that. But the worst example I've seen, and I hold it up, I wish I had an image that you could show on the screen. I hold it up as an example of exactly what you're talking about. Cairo 7 News, back when our then Attorney General Bob Ferguson was running his campaign for governor, he's the governor now, of course, he was trying to show that, he was tough on sex offenders because he was under this criticism and scrutiny for releasing too many violent sex offenders from a place called McNeil Island, which Washington State has an involuntary commitment where they literally put irredeemable sex offenders on an island, which I think is just great. But as Attorney General, he had been releasing them at a very rapid rate out into communities. So he was being criticized for that. So his office put out this press release about how they just won a case to keep a violent sex offender confined to McNeil Island. So for anyone who's paying attention, there was clearly like a motive behind that, right? He's trying to change public perception during his campaign for governor. Well, Cairo 7 News took that press release, copy pasted it as a news story, and we went through and highlighted all the areas that were the same and any areas of change. It was 99.9% verbatim. There were like 2 word changes, and that's it. And when you held it up next to each other, it was insane. And we called this out. We posted it. They never took the story down. They never apologized. They never changed it. It's probably up to this day.
I wish that I hadn't been a part of doing stuff like that back when I was a reporter, but I did. I totally did. I bought it hook, line, and sinker until I started to wake up. And like I said, I mean, that was the beginning of the end of my career was like, well, okay, you can't trust this stuff. So then I need time to investigate it. And then they don't give you time, or they don't feel it's necessary. They think you're just, being tough or, obstinate. And like, one time when I came back and I was doing a story about how Trump was, ruining the Clean Water Act. He was gutting the Clean Water Act, and it's going to make all of our water dirty. And I was hearing these valid alternative opinions about what he was doing. And all I had time to do was like interview one Republican and put 2 sound bites in the story that were like 10 seconds long, because I had to keep my story 90 seconds. And my boss was like, okay, well, I see what this person says and I see what that person says, but what's the truth? And I was like, how would I supposed to know? You know what I mean? I haven't had any time. I had like 2 hours today. I shoot my own video. I shoot and edit my own video. I have to drive the car. Do you think I had time to read the Clean Water Act? I mean, I don't even know what it said back then. So how do I know what's going on? And one of our, longtime main anchors was like, well, just do what NBC says. They usually get it right. And she really meant that. I mean, she really meant that. NBC usually gets it right. Just say what NBC says. And when you're flying under the cover of groupthink, then it's safety in numbers. And they rarely are going to get called out by their own. That's who they care about. And they still believe that if you are criticizing them, it's because you don't want to eat your broccoli, and they know what's good for you and you don't. And even more so now, I think there's a lot of like digging in their heels to shove what they believe is good for you down your throat. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I certainly have not been invited to teach any journalism classes. Have you?
Have not. Okay. I think we're both outcasts at this point.
So anyway, Brandi, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I think actually one of the better places too to follow Brandi. She's on Patreon. You go support her show, Undivided. Undivided is a show, and go watch her. But also she's great on Twitter. Lots of content coming out, Brandi. I mean, you brought up like your 36-year-old is trying to make it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you do it. It's like you've got nerves of steel. I have to take a lot of breaks from the internet and like go milk goats and stuff to just decompress. I don't know how you do it. But anyway, on Twitter, Brandi Kruse, so you get a lot of info. Anything else I didn't ask you want to get off your chest, Brandi?
No, I don't think so. I appreciate you giving me time to talk about more than just my TDS comment. Yeah, that's it. Just Antifa is a real thing. We need to dismantle Antifa. I'm going out to cover No Kings. Last time I did, I got assaulted by Antifa. So let's hope this time's better.
Well, and I will add before we go too, that if people are not familiar, look, the video that got my YouTube channel on the map before I got suppressed during COVID was an Antifa video. It was, I covered Antifa as a journalist. Here's what the news leaves out. And all I did was just say, like, this is what we did every year on May Day. And this is what they don't tell you. And like how crazy it was. And it was just part of the culture. I mean, we all knew going into May Day, this is what we were going to do. That was the day you came in wearing your rain jacket that matched everybody else's. You didn't wear your King 5 rain jacket. You wore beanie on your head. Your photographer was taking a tiny camera. If they did take a big one, then you knew you were going to be the target. There were, somebody got shot like 10 feet from me in Washington University of Washington's Red Square. And then there was like pepper gas. It was just crazy. I remember texting my dog sitter, I hope I make it back tonight. I don't know. And finally, like, why am I doing this? And so thankfully, I was able to convince them that as the environmental reporter, this did not serve their purpose. Like, let me do an environmental story. Don't you need something different? Because I was like, why am I going out here and risking my life for this? It's like the TV stations on one hand, yeah, they were, I don't know, showing like, oh, look at this. But, like this was sort of bad or something, but they kind of liked it. They liked that, everybody tuned in to see how crazy it was.
Mhm.
And they wanted all of us out there showing how crazy it was. And there was no effort, in other words, to like really try to critically think through what was going on. It was just used as like violent porn. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just watching people tear stuff up and get
Yeah.
ratings out of it every
Well, I'll
year.
say that that's one of the points of disappointment why I'm angry with the local TV stations over Antifa, because they've all experienced it. They know it's a real thing. I
Yeah,
watched a King 5 reporter or a videographer years ago get hit across the head with this metal
right.
piece of rebar.
Yeah.
And now they're acting like none of that ever happened. It's like, you guys went through this. It's not just the right wingers being assaulted. You were all assaulted. So it
Yeah.
bothers me that they're now just, I guess, in the name of left wing ideology, we hate Trump, acting like, memory holding it. But
Yeah. It's
yeah,
too scared to speak out against their own, I think, too, if they're aware of it, because
yeah,
social ostracization, I don't know. It's such a powerful manipulator, I guess. I always say that I don't think that I don't think the number one influence for people is money. I think ultimately it's like a spiritual god complex, and I think that plays into it. It's power, and I think it's far scarier to think about being alone for most people than it is to be poor, and they would rather be alone. They would rather fit in. You know what I mean? They would rather fit
yeah,
in and not be like seen negatively by their peers than to stand up and say what's true. And that's fine, I guess, if you're, I don't know, you're just mowing someone's lawn for a living. I mean, I don't know. I want an honest person doing that. But if you're a journalist, like you really need to have the ability to think about this stuff and to be willing to stick your neck out for what's actually true. And unfortunately, like the same psychodynamic issues that you see in any other profession follow journalism, but it's never really talked about. I think it would have gone a long way in a lot of editorial meetings that I've sat in for a manager to say, like, hey, where are our biases today? Who's really in power in the situation we're talking about? Is it the oppressed people that we think are really
mhm,
oppressed, or is it another group? Like, who's actually running the show here? Who should we really be critical of? We just,
yeah,
where are we missing the dark shadow corners because we have our own biases? There just wasn't really a whole lot like that. And I think even just a tiny bit of like, I don't know, just encouragement for people to do some self-analysis and be self-aware would have gone a long way, but they just didn't do that. I don't know if they didn't probably do it in your newsroom either. They didn't do it in mine.
no. But you see what's happening to Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss at CBS, and it's a full-on revolt because she wants people to check their biases and for the product to get better and to return to journalistic standards. And now she's this evil, horrible right-wing human. Which, another example, she's a moderate. Barry Weiss really is a pretty moderate mainstream Republican, but she's being painted as a right-wing, Trump Nazi. So
Yeah, I know. I would not paint her like, I don't know. There's so much you could go into in that, but I would not paint her as a populist conservative.
no.
She's, so she's certainly, has very different opinions on Israel than a lot of the people who support, the maybe Trump, but are critical of that situation. So she's not, you know what I mean? I don't know. It's an interesting world we live in. But Brandi, thanks again. Thanks everybody who supports the show. Go check out Brandi at Undivided, and we'll see you next time.